I think that for me, it was a real baptism of fire raising funding for the first time. I don't think any founder raising for the first time really knows how hard it's going to be.
Hello and welcome back to Startup 360. Today I am hosting without our dear friend Simon. He is at South Start. So instead we're going to have a special co-host guesting today who I'll introduce in just a bit. But first of all, yes, this is Founder Fun, not Founder Mode, where we talk to founders about the more human side of life. And Startup 360 is supported by Vanta, helping startups unlock market opportunities through automated compliance. So when you watch this episode or listen to this episode, it's going to be Friday, and tomorrow, Saturday, is International Women's Day. So we have a special International Women's Day themed episode. And I just want to acknowledge first up that the International Women's Day is irrelevant if we're not including intersectional feminism. And so it's not just about gender and gender identity, but also how that intersects with ethnicity, sexuality, neurodiversity, socioeconomic status, and a whole bunch of other things that I've missed as well. And I do want to call out that today's episode hasn't quite met my own personal standard for visual diversity. And I do consider the parts of my own identity that are diverse to not be visual. But yeah, I just want to call that out and say that I'm very aware of it, and I was aiming to do better. I think quite a few people probably have unread messages from me in their inbox. So if you get one and you opened it a bit late, I'm very sorry. Yes, so as a white woman, the best way that I can help other women of all backgrounds is to give them access to the platform that I have and amplify their voices and what they're saying. So I just want to call out all the women today who might not feel heard or represented, thinking of you. And yes, so I'm now going to introduce our guest co-host, Cat Long, co-founder and CEO of Trace. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Kayla. It's a pleasure to be here. I acknowledge also that the diversity on the outside isn't quite there, but it's a real pleasure to be here. And for me, International Women's Day is all about me looking for role models myself, and to the extent that I can be a role model as a founder, I would love to be. I'm not pretending that's my only goal, but it's just something that I'm really passionate about. I'm the co-founder of a company called Trace, as you said. We are a climate tech startup. We launched in 2020, so I guess still startup, but been around long enough now to sort of know what I'm doing. We help businesses decarbonize. It's all about making it super accessible for any company to reach net zero. That's something that my co-founder and I, another woman, Joanna, founded out of a real personal experience that we'd been through, having our own small business before that and wanting to make it super sustainable, and frankly just not knowing where to start. So we thought we got to unlock something here. So 5 years old, it's called Trace, and as two female founders, we've been through the ups and downs. So I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, I'm interested to know your experience as a female founder and whether or not you even hate the term female founder, and how that has differed from maybe being an employee.
Yeah, I mean, do I hate the term? I don't, because it's true. But yeah, it's often used to try and, the more we talk about it, the more that we're kind of like separating the genders in being a founder, right? But also the stats speak the truth. So the challenge I have with trying to articulate how I find it is that I don't have an A/B test, right? I haven't been into every pitch as a male. So true. I can't go like, that would have been easier if I was a guy, or if I was XYZ, if whatever it was. However, I would say that it has been difficult, and on paper we have perhaps had a slower start in, for example, getting funding. And that for a startup is kind of everything, right? Until you're off the ground. So I've certainly found that a challenge. We have raised money. We've been successful there, but if I compare to some of our peers, not as much.
Did you ever have a self-doubt that was like, oh, maybe if we added a third co-founder and they happen to be a man, that would help?
Yes, definitely. Honestly, to the point that my husband's in sales, I've sometimes just said to him, I would do anything to just put you in this pitch, just as a test, kind of to my A/B test.
Just stand there and look pretty.
Well, happy to, if I can. I actually think it's less about him looking like a guy and me looking like a woman, and it's more that he just is more confident and has less self-doubt because he's a trained salesperson. And I don't know if that's a gender difference, but I'm confident that he would be able to sell my business better than me.
It's tricky because it's so theoretical and hypothetical, and like there's no way to prove it.
Exactly.
But the doubt exists
And
regardless.
the numbers exist, right?
Yeah.
So it's not been easy, but it's a journey that I've loved every minute of.
Yeah, and then you recently had a baby. Congratulations.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Second. How has becoming a working mother and potentially a working founder, mother-founder, changed the dynamic of being at work?
Oh, yeah, good question. I mean, it's to be honest, second time round, I have been at work a lot. So, and this is all thanks to my husband and parents, who I've just basically roped in to help a lot. But the reason I'm here today is because my parents can look after my little son. But I think I was naive going into starting a startup in my early 30s, knowing that I would like a family, of how difficult that would be. I'm glad I was naive, because I honestly don't know if I would have done it, just because it is hard. Like, I'm literally juggling, breastfeeding and staying up all night, and then still running a business and feeling very passionate about that and not wanting to just let it go. Maternity leave isn't really fully maternity leave as a founder. So that's been really, really tough, but it really shows how important having your support network around you is. And that's probably the same for male founders when they have an early kid, like a baby, early days. I'm sure their partner has to step up and do more. My husband's had to step up and do more. My parents have had to come up and help. So it's all about putting that support system around you. But yeah, it's tough.
It's really interesting you bring that up, because something that I want to ask all our guests today is about what they have in place that enables them to do the things that they can do. Because obviously interviewing founders, we're interviewing very high achieving people who go above and beyond in their everyday life. But yeah, having your parents available, having that village, what else in your life has facilitated you being able to do the things that you can do?
I mean, I'm hardly going to sit here and say I'm made of money, but you do need some sort of financial security. And the fact that my husband has, a good job, in inverted commas, which means honestly he can pay the mortgage and not me, that really helps. If he was also in a startup, I don't think we'd both be able to do this, both from a financial and a kind of time management perspective. So there is some financial stability you need. Maybe not need, but I have found useful. Having that external family can be useful. Having my parents here has been amazing. And then just, you have to build your own boundaries with your teams, with yourself, with your friends. I've had to pull back on how much time I spend with my friends. I've had to tell my team that I'm going to be working some really weird hours, and please forgive me for just calling them at weird times, which they've been amazing and accepting of. And then I think the final thing is, you kind of have to accept that you don't feel like you're being a superstar parent. And don't get me wrong, I know I'm doing a fine job, but am I spending as many hours as I would like to with my sons? Absolutely not. But I just recognize this is a period of time where I just want to give my all to the business, and hopefully that will facilitate me having more time with my family in the future.
That's really nice. Very, very nice. One more question for you. What is something that has changed over your career for the better and gives you hope that it will continue to improve?
I think role models. I think seeing more women in positions of power, and not just women, but minorities. And we've still got a way to go. But I mean, I think yesterday I read that there is actually no gender pay gap in the UK. I haven't fully scrutinized those numbers, but it was in the paper, and I was like, that's amazing. So there are numbers and sort of cues that I see every day that I'm like, this gives me hope. I mean, I worked my first, or actually my second job out of university was in London, in banking. I was regularly the only woman in a room, so often, whereas I don't really feel like that's the case now. I always feel like I've got a good community of women and men around me. There's still a way to go with the gender pay gap here, and just biases that I do feel every day, but I really think we're making progress.
Yeah, it is nice to see. And especially when I started in startups, being the only woman, so common. And now there are more. But I feel like we've really got to do work as the, women who've been in startups for longer to make sure that the women entering the industry
Yes.
stay
Yes.
and feel welcome.
100%. And it's challenging when you are in a period of your life where you might want children, because it isn't easy as a founder to go and take time off, so there are certain things that I don't know how we're ever going to fully solve. Maternity leave as a problem, right?
Yeah.
Something that every woman will, if they want to have children, will want to do. So there's some biological things that I think will always stand against us, but again, it's about having the network of supporting people around us, like your other team, your co-founder, your parents, your husband, your partner, whoever it might be.
All right, Kat, you're going to be with us for the whole episode.
Can't wait.
So let's bring on our first guest, who is Kaylene Langford. She's the author of How to Start a Side Hustle and also the founder of Startup Creative. We'll be back in just a second. Welcome back, and we have our first guest with us, Kaylene Langford. Kaylene is the author of How to Start a Side Hustle and the founder of Startup Creative. First of all, where are you? Looks incredible.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm actually at ACME in Melbourne, attending the Australian International Documentary Conference. So I've been here for the last few days. It's been amazing.
Very cool. Yeah, we would have loved to have had you in the studio, but I can't complain that you're at an incredible event as well.
I know, the sun's up.
Cool. So you are a First Nations woman, and we're obviously talking about International Women's Day today. How have you found the intersection of your identities has impacted your work for better or for worse?
Yeah, so definitely as a First Nations person, a woman, also a queer person, there's definitely a lot of things going on there that help to can set you up to fail, I guess, or statistically speaking, can sometimes set you back and not give you as many opportunities. And I think that when I first started out, I definitely had a few issues with trying to fit myself into mostly male-dominated areas. And then over the years, I guess that was the inspiring part for building my business, because I was like, well, I feel like I don't fit in these spaces. So where do I fit? And what kind of rooms do I want to be in? And that really inspired me to build Startup Creative in a way that was going to, showcase people of color. It was going to be, a lot of, female creatives. And I guess platform First Nations people as well has been a big thing over the last few years as well.
Yeah, amazing. I'd love to hear a bit more about the work you do and kind of the intersection again with how you help people maybe from minority backgrounds, female, First Nations, LGBTQI.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a business coach. I run Startup Creative. I do business coaching, events, workshops, podcasting. I'm a writer. But I've also done, I guess, I've given a lot of my spare time to people from First Nations backgrounds. And I think even, starting in the business scene at first, it felt a bit like, I don't want to let on that I've got these queerness and things like that. And I shaved my head and it was a bit hard to hide. But it actually has become my strong point in that I love it when I get an email of someone saying, I'm looking for someone who can be LGBT friendly. And I think that sometimes there is a lot of sensitivities around, the POV of a minority group. And we want to walk into spaces that we feel safe and culturally looked after, and that we're not going to run into someone who's going to be accidentally homophobic or racist. And so, leaning into it and making it my personal brand has been I think made it really authentic and that people find me through that. But B, then it, means I just get to show up as myself. And as, I think all business advice that I give is when you actually lean into who you are and what you are, then it's less effort to try and live up to a brand because you are authentically doing it. And I think as we move into this world of AI and digital realms, I think we're looking for more authenticity in the brands that we follow and we buy from. So, I'm lucky that I learned early on that it was a strength.
Yeah, you've just said so many things that I want to expand on, but we don't have time for it. So I'm trying to figure out how I pick the top one. First of all, just a side comment, and then we can get that out of the way. I really identify with what you said about creating your own space, and that's how you step into your own power and things like that. Having had lots of male managers throughout my career and being told I can't do things, and then once I started working for myself, being well, I can do these things, and no one's going to stop me. That's silly.
Absolutely.
But to go back to what you said about making sure that your advice that you give to your clients and stuff is really relevant. I did see something online that was saying a lot of advice is given with the kind of idea that the person who's receiving it is going to be a white man, and that advice works for a white man but doesn't work for a working mother or doesn't work for someone who's disadvantaged. And so how do you make sure that your advice is actionable by the people that you're giving it to?
That's interesting.
I mean, I think similar to like carving out spaces that you want to exist in, it's often like, that's what Business 101 is. When I wrote my book, How to Start a Side Hustle, it's like, what is a business model? And, most of your audience would know this, is that you're filling a gap that doesn't exist. You're providing a solution. So I think that coming from that firsthand personal experience and something I often reflect on International Women's Day is that one of our strong points as women is our intuition and our ability to tune in to what's needed and what might be missing, and to pick up on some of the subtleties of like how things could be done better and people could be better taken care of. And I think that sometimes in a workplace we often think that that's too sensitive or woo woo or emotional, but in thousands of years that women have, a lot of First Nations and Indigenous people, matriarchy and women often lead the communities and are held up for a lot of the wisdom that they bring. And so I think encouraging women to come back into that power of being like, hey, I've got my finger on the pulse and I know what's up. And I would say the second thing that I would give advice to women on International Women's Day is like, leaning into the confidence to speak from that space, because we might not always be able to say, here's a chart that backs it up, because it can sometimes be intuitive. But a lot of some of my best content that I've created and the ideas that I've come up from my business have been from that sense of like, this doesn't feel right. It could be done better. Or like, what if we did it this way? Or, sometimes I've written some really great blog posts from a dream that I had. I often wake up at 3 a.m. and will write notes in my phone from just my unconscious mind processing ideas at 3 a.m. So, I think it's strength to be able to tune into that, but then also confidently back it. And then I guess the invitation for people who aren't women is to also trust that and know that there's a place in society for and decision-making rooms and creative brainstorming for an intuition.
Love that. Have you observed any big changes in the, since you've been doing your business in your client base, in what they come to you for and what they're struggling with, and I guess where they have made progress?
I think that there's been a bit of a fatigue since COVID. I think there was, I know even for me, like I showed up so much in COVID to, was always online, chatting to people and offering free check-ins and hosting webinars and being like, how do we pivot? And, it's so much support. And then I think there's a bit of a burnout in that small businesses really went to town on pivoting and figuring out how to stay alive in the COVID. And then that kind of led into, economic changes and cost of living crisis. And so I think there's a real burnout where people are starting to kind of peel back off, trying to do it all and really starting to be like, well, what's the essentials thing that my business does? Like why do I exist? What's the priority for making money? Rather than having to, create lots of content and be online just for the sake of keeping up with the algorithm, but rather being like, how do I take care of myself? And then how do I also, hone in on what I'm doing as a business rather than trying to do it all.
I know we don't have you for very long, so I wanted to ask if you had a really good kind of blanket piece of advice that is broadly applicable to maybe women who are self-doubting themselves or are thinking they want to start a business or they want to further their career.
Yeah. One of my favorite sayings is just start. And it's one of also probably the scariest things to do. And I still remember starting and being really scared, but it's not as scary as you think once you start. And, similar to your community and Startup Creative, there are a lot of people out there who are willing to help with the support. And so reached out to these people. You don't have to do it alone. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is a lot of advice. There's a lot of people, slide into our DMs and say hi. I'd love to say hi and support. But yeah, access a community and support. Find that person who's done it before. But do one small thing every day is my step. So, a year from now, you'll wish you started today. And so one thing every day for 365 days is 365 steps in the direction of that goal, which isn't, which is more than being like, no, if I have to have it all together, then I'll take the first step. Often then that's the way procrastination kicked in. So I think one small step, one achievable step, and let it compound and build over time.
Thank you so much for joining us. I am definitely going to be sliding into your DMs with way more questions after this.
I've made some great friends from people sliding into my DMs, so I'm always here for it.
The DMs are open. That's what I'm hearing. Thank you so much. We'll be right back with our next guest.
Okay, welcome back to this special episode, International Women's Day episode. We're very excited to have Jess Baird Walsh here today. She's the founder of Capital X. She's founded 2 startups. She's a mother of 3. She has been running almost every day for 1,000 days. I feel like that's an entire episode in itself, and now works in a corporate environment. So very excited to have you here today. Can you tell us a bit about Capital X, Jess?
Thanks so much, Kat and Kayla. Great to see you both, and thanks for having me. Capital X is essentially a database of 600 leading startup and technology professionals in Australia committed to supporting women founders to fund and scale their startups, essentially. So men and women, although the database is mostly men at the moment, and lots of exciting conversations happening about how we can take it from being a database to being something more than a database. Having said that, making a bunch of really amazing introductions for women founders across the ecosystem to investors and advisors who can support them with fundraising or with other aspects of their growth.
Tell us what inspired you to start it. That's amazing. What took you to the idea?
Well, I have, as you know, been a founder. I've gone through the experience of raising capital myself. Kat, I think, we were both fundraising at the same time at a certain point, and it was really difficult. It's difficult if you come from a network other than VC and startups. So for out-of-network founders, including for a lot of women, it's incredibly difficult to get in front of the investors and the networks that you need in order to be able to raise capital. So really, that started me on a journey of what are the things that I can do to change the statistics around the gender funding gap. And that was something that it turned out that I had a reasonable network that I could start to build from. It actually was a question from another female founder on LinkedIn that got the list started. That's a fantastic founder called Helena, and she asked, where are all the women? And really it was a nod to where are the women? There are so many of us in the ecosystem, but we need more visibility, and that's kind of what got the ball rolling, essentially. And now we've got investors from all the top firms in Australia, and almost 600 women in total, or 600 people in total on the list.
So you've had incredible experiences across so many sides of the table. So being an employee, being a founder, being involved in receiving funding and helping other people get funding. When you contextualize all of that with being a woman, which one would you say is the most difficult position to be in?
I think that for me, it was a real baptism of fire raising funding for the first time. I don't think any founder raising for the first time really knows how hard it's going to be. And if you're not networked, the challenges that you're going to come across, the huge learning curve, even if you have experience in pitching, even if you have experience in putting together presentations, it's totally different when you're a startup founder and it's your baby. And it absolutely is. In order to be successful, you have to live and breathe your startup. I don't advocate toxic work-life imbalance, but I do think when you start a business, it takes up a part of you that is really kind of core to who you are for the time that you're building that business. And I also think that in the current environment, there is definitely a power disparity when you're going in as a first-time founder. In most cases, not necessarily all cases, but in most cases, I think particularly women experience that process of raising funding to be quite intimidating. That certainly was my experience, which is not to say I had bad experiences with investors. I had fantastic experiences, but I was doing it for the first time. It's hard. And you also know, if you look at the statistics, the odds are stacked against you, which doesn't help. I was actually just reading before I came here an article in Capital Brief by Bronwyn Clune talking about how the perceptions sometimes shape the reality, and we all need to be careful about the things that we reinforce, because we might unknowingly be reinforcing stereotypes about women founders and their fundability, which ultimately are not helpful. So I think when I think about Capital X, really what I'm trying to do there is to say, what can I do to be helpful, and how can we democratise these introductions in a way that is positive for all sides? Because even though the power disparity, I think, is felt by founders, ultimately VCs need founders in order to be successful. They need great businesses to invest in. Most VCs that I've spoken to are actively trying to build their pipeline of women founders and founders of, different sort of intersectionality. So we need more women to get in front of them. And I want to be a positive part of that puzzle rather than reinforcing the negative stereotypes about how hard it is.
And you said as you came in here, you felt like you just need to scale yourself. You've got such big ambitions, clearly, which is amazing. There's so much you want to do, but you've also got a family. You're an employee, and you've got Capital X. How do you balance that? Because there's such a narrative, right, that the women generally hold a bit of a cognitive load of the household and have just more to do. So you're such a busy woman. How do you manage all those three roles?
I think every day is different. I can't remember. I guess it's the law of our grandmothers, or the law of being a human. Who you choose for your life partner, if you choose to be in a partnered relationship, is incredibly important. My husband is amazing, and we share 50% of the load. Sometimes it's a little bit more on him. Sometimes it's a little bit more on me. But that's incredibly important. We've got a very busy household, and we have to share the load. Otherwise, one or both of us would break. For me, we talked about running. Yes, I've been running every day on the 29th of March, it will be 1,000 days straight. I'm raising money for the Indigenous Marathon Foundation and seeking to inspire business leaders to donate to that incredible cause. That sometimes means I get up 5 out of 7 days at 4:30 to get that done before I get the kids ready for school and then get into work. And then I'm up late making intros for people. But ultimately, I don't think I would be as satisfied as a human being if I didn't have things that brought purpose to my life. So I've made a conscious decision to lean into things that I care about, because in the absence of those things, I don't think I would be as happy and fulfilled as I am.
I love that. It's not all about work, but it's about what brings you fulfillment as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. What advice, there's always someone on International Women's Day who's like, do we even need this? How would you go about getting someone like that to shift their perspective?
About whether we need International Women's Day or whether we need a focus on gender disparities?
Yeah, someone who maybe doesn't believe that women face obstacles that they don't.
I think the data speaks for itself, really. And I've been in conversations where people say, because I don't think that the lack of access to opportunities or disparity is something that is only faced by gender. There are other, forms of inequality in our society that I think are just as downplayed as the gender question. I think the data largely does speak for itself, and I think it can be hard to change people's perceptions. I think the question of access to opportunity is a really important one, and I think framed around access to opportunity, I think we can all agree that not everyone has access to the same sorts of opportunities in life, depending on access to education. There are a whole range of different questions. It comes back to being networked, to having access to people who can help you learn about things, who can talk to you. So there are so many different aspects. I don't think you're going to be able to change everyone's mind, but I do think the data speaks for itself. I mean, we've seen that around the pay disparity, the WGEA stats that have come out this week. The same is true every year for the gender funding gap. I think we need to talk less about I think we need to talk more about tactical and systemic changes that we can make. I don't know if we'll be able to change everyone's mind on an individual basis.
I mean, if you could wave a magic wand to try and change the disparity, is there anything you would do?
Something that I've observed, I mean, I guess there's the funding gap, and then there's the gender pay gap in a salaried sense, and I think they're quite different. What I would say to your point before around the mental load is that something that I have experienced in a more corporate environment, which I think is really fantastic, is men taking parental leave, and that being encouraged and that being really positively modelled by people who are really senior in the organisation. In the organisation that I work for, there are some people where you have couples and those couples, you see two people sharing the load in a way that is so incredibly healthy. I actually earlier today was looking for someone on Teams to check their availability, and that's a senior man, and his status was set to parenting. So if I could change one thing, I would say we need more organisations and more households that embrace a healthy view of what it is to be a parent, regardless of your gender. And I think that's ultimately the thing that's going to change access to opportunities for women and to enable them to, whatever their chosen career is, whether it's running a business, whether it's being an employee in someone else's business, you simply can't do that if you don't have the bandwidth to be able to accelerate whatever your preferred pathway is. So if I could have a magic wand, I would say we need more healthy modelling, and we need both genders to lean in and take an equal share of responsibility.
Yeah, there's a lot for men to gain in the way of like having time off and having time with their kids and that as well. So it's not like raising women up detracts from men in any way. No.
Absolutely not. And I've observed that with my own husband. We had a sabbatical. He had a very busy job. We took a sabbatical, and the bond that he has with our daughters as a result of being able to spend that time together in their early lives is really special. And that's true in the corporate environment where I'm talking to people about the ability to be able to have the freedom to breathe and step away from their desks to spend that time with their kids, and they really value that. And it's very healthy. I think it should be modelled, and there should be more of it.
Amazing. I mean, I'm speaking from the perspective of having recently had a baby and running a company, and I would love to be able to take off more time, but I do hope that actually that also is sending a message that it's like, this is possible, because I am doing it through balance with my husband and the rest of my family. So we know it's possible, and that's setting a good tone for it not always falling on the woman to do, the lion's share of the parenting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, amazing.
I want to ask a question to you both. How do you feel about International Women's Day in general? Is it needed? Is it what it was intended to be? Is it effective? Should we continue?
I have to be honest and say that I have a complicated relationship with International Women's Day as a concept. I mean, I think you can tell, I love women. I'm running a project to help elevate women. I am in a team surrounded by powerhouse women. I have 3 daughters, so of course I want to celebrate women. I think I have a little bit more of a complex relationship with the way that, I think there's a lot of performative activity that happens around Women's Day, which I doesn't sit very well with me. But I think the core intent for me of celebrating and raising women up is something that I try to live by every day. not just the 8th of March.
Yeah. Exactly the same for me. It's actually, I'm embarrassed to say this year it sort of came around and I almost had forgotten about it. So it's funny how it depends on how much you're leaning into the conversation at your time in your life as to how prevalent it feels. So this year, being invited to come and do this, I was like, oh God, how are we there again? It feels like only a couple of months ago. What has changed? What can I say? Do we need to have this conversation again? I did feel a bit like it came around quicker than a year. Probably just because of how busy we've all been, right? But as you said, without having that day dedicated to be able to celebrate progress and amazing women, then it would be a real shame to lose that. But it also has a bit of an ick for me in that if we're always dredging up the challenges that we're all facing, I don't love the poor me attitude. I never try and portray that. I never talk about that. So I think it's got to be about celebration, not about the kind of complaint and the poor me side of it.
A bit like Valentine's Day. There's that one day of the year where you do celebrate, but you really should be doing that every day.
Be nice to your spouse or significant other every day. Yeah.
24/7, 365.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you both so much for joining me. Today's show was produced and edited by James Bass and Matt Jackson, with special thanks to Ella Walsh, Ozbiz, and Vanta. This has been our delightful International Women's Day episode. Join us again next week for another new one with new guests, and Simon will be back.